Okay. All right, I think we have just about everybody here.
There you are.
All right, so if the rest of you, if you're not speaking, go ahead and turn off your audio, but I'm happy to see your faces on video if you're comfortable with that. It makes me feel like I'm talking to someone, not just a blank screen, but it's fine. Either way is fine. All right, so let's launch. So here we are. It's incredible. We're already at session 6. How did that happen? So we're at session 6, outcomes and evaluation. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes before we dive into this. I know I say this every time, but this is really one of my favorite topics. I love all these topics, but outcomes and evaluation is something that I've been doing for many, many years. And I'm going to just start by saying that I was head of a federally funded program at Marlborough College Grad School for a while, which was an amazing it was an amazing grant that allowed us to work with nonprofits around the state to help them improve their ability to measure their success, their effectiveness, and also to do better, to improve their success. And we used this book, Trying Hard is Not Good Enough by Mark Friedman, which is results-based accountability. Some of you may have heard of it. You can see mine is very well used and marked up and all kinds of things. But this is something that I became very, very immersed in, and I actually taught it for several years at Marlborough College grad school. So I love this stuff. And the real challenge for me every time I teach it is to get it down, shrink it to the size of the class, because I could talk about this for 10 classes, but we'll talk about it for one class. All right. First of all, outcomes and evaluation. Why does this really matter? Well, for 2 reasons. First of all, as far as funders are concerned, when I first started writing grants, we could get away with some pretty simple evaluations. And I'm going to read you an example. Funders didn't really look so much at how you were really making a difference. They looked at, how many widgets did you do? How many books did you give out? How many lessons did you teach? How many kids did you have in your program? And that was pretty easy to do. That's pretty easy to count. We're all very good at that sort of thing. So, that was simple. Then funders started to get smarter, and they started asking for quite a bit more in terms of really accountability, showing that the money that we're giving you actually is being spent to make the kind of difference that you are talking about. And that is what I'm going to really focus on here, is how do you write your evaluation and how do you design outcomes so that you can show that you've actually made the difference that you have said you're going to do. Now, I have to say, for some of your programs, this is easier than for others. So for the program in Townsend, which is installing a chair to go up, that is a pretty basic, easy program to measure. And funders are really going to be looking at, did you install the program? I mean, did you install the chair? Is it working right? Did you do it well? And are people really using it? And so that's a lot simpler than, for example, the Bennington program, where we're looking at people who have not been successful in a lot of ways in life. This is the program where we're having, a quite intensive program, residential program for men in recovery. And just counting how many go through the program and how many things you did to them is not going to satisfy a funder, and it shouldn't. So the second reason that really looking at outcomes and not just what you did is so important is for your programs, because you don't want to do something that doesn't really make the difference that you set out to make. And so if you only measure how many people you served, how many classes you did, how many hours, that is a start and it matters, but it really doesn't get you to what it is we want to really measure and why we're doing our programs, which is to really, make a difference in important ways. Usually we're making a difference with people, but in some cases, we're making a difference, like in that program that I gave you an example of early on with the park, where we were, cleaning out the old plants and planting plants that are going to keep the water, the stream clean, and stop erosion and contribute to the health of the soil. It's really the park that we're talking about. The park is the client, even though we also talked about, making it user friendly. So that's important. But you need to first identify, who is it we're trying to affect here? And people sometimes get mixed up and they think, oh, if we increase our staff numbers, then that should be an outcome. But that is not an outcome unless the whole focus of your program was to build, the capacity of some program serving people, or it was, unless that was the whole goal, was to build the capacity. That's very rare. Often, almost 90% of the time or more, you're building the capacity with a purpose in mind. So yes, if you said that you were going to add 3 or 4 staff with this funding, that's important to measure. But what's really important to the funder, and really in the bottom line to you, is what did those staff do that helped you reach those goals that you set? And that goal at the end of the day was not to just have more staff. So I'm just going to read you an example, share an example, and then we're going to go and then we're going to dig in deep and talk about the 3 kinds of measures that we almost always look at, which are process measures, which is how much did we do. Quality measures, you don't have to write this down because you have slides with it. Quality measures, how well did we do it? And outcome measures, which is what we really care about, which is anyone better off? So let's talk about a program. I have in a couple of the classes, I've referred to the after school program for youth, where we were working with youth who otherwise weren't really engaged in meaningful activities. They weren't in sports, they were getting in trouble, their grades might not be good, they were going home to empty houses. And so this was really a program to help them develop healthy habits, behaviors, connections, really become folks who are making healthy, positive decisions for themselves. And so let me read the project goal. The central mission of the Next Generation Adolescent Health Project is to carry out a whole health integrated initiative that will engage, and this was in Rutland 12 to 15-year-olds, especially those not currently leading healthy lifestyles, in activities that will inspire long-term healthy habits. And then we talked about measurable outcomes. Serve at least 25% of the target, I'm going to shorten these, but serve at least 25% of the target population. Increase health measures for participants, and we listed some. Increase developmental assets, and we listed some. And increase interagency collaboration and teacher, parent, service provider, and youth commitment to whole health strategies for pre-adolescents and adolescents. I'm going to read you the first set of measures that we had as part of the evaluation, because listen to it. And again, in the old days, this is what I would give in grants, and this is what I would see when I was reviewing grants. So how are we going to measure the success of this? All right, let's look at what we call the program process measures. The timeliness of service startup and the number of services provided. The number joining the program, Next Generation, and participants in each activity. The hours of activities offered per month by activity, and the percent of target population served. Those sound pretty good, right? We're serving a bunch of kids, we're offering a lot of activities, we're providing, we're recording the number of services we're providing, we're recording the number of hours, but what's missing here? Can anyone tell me what is wrong? Why isn't this sufficient? Anybody? Because it sounds pretty good. We're doing all this stuff, right? That we said we'd do. So I'm gonna just like, I love to share this example of why this isn't sufficient. All right, we say we're starting up and we're doing all the, we're offering all these services and we have all these participants and we're doing all these hours, but we are not through any one of these measuring whether even one of those kids we served is any better off in terms of the goals that we set, in terms of being healthier, in terms of developmental assets, in terms of our goal, our objective of bringing together other agencies that serve these kids, so we're working together. So here's an example of how we could have run this program and looked really great on these measures, and yet really fallen down on actually achieving our goal of, teaching these kids healthy habits, healthy behaviors, healthy interpersonal, activities and friends and all that. So let's say that we offered this program and the whole focus was on getting more kids in and doing more, having more activities and serving at least 25% of the population. I'm going to go a little outrageous here, but when I was an executive director of a Boys and Girls Club, we got in trouble because I started a homework club early on. And because I saw that many of our youth were not getting good grades, they were not doing their homework. And so I just thought that that was a really important thing. We lost a bunch of our kids right then. And so we were getting dinged for, the numbers were down. We eventually built them up, but there were definitely some kids who weren't there, who didn't want to do homework. So instead, what I could have done and what we could have done through this program, if we really were just focused on the number of kids and the number of things we did, we could have every day that kids came, we could have we could have had an ice cream sundae bar every day with every topping imaginable. We could have offered an incredible array of films, movies that kids like to see. And we had computers. We could have said, if you come here for at least an hour a day, you can play all the video games you want the whole time you're here. And we could have reported, listen to these reports. We would have served, let's see. I mean, look at these program process measures. We could have started up the services. We could have had plenty of services provided. We would have had, because we would have just, we would have called it, just the after school whole health program, but, it doesn't say what we did. We would have had every kid would have brought 10 friends. Everybody would have wanted to be there. And the hours of activities, how easy would it be to just turn on turn on movies, serve a ice cream sundae and have films? It would have been so cheap. We would have hardly needed any staff. So it actually would have been very efficient also. And the percentage of target population, oh my God, we would have skyrocketed. So that is a cautionary tale. Why these numbers matter. They do matter, but they're absolutely not sufficient because you can go terribly wrong. And they actually create disincentives to do some of the hard work. And an example of that is, I'm old enough to, remember when it was something called DRGs, but we have something like that now. Medicine has really changed. Healthcare has really changed. It used to be that your doctor wasn't paid by how many patients they saw per day. They were just paid a salary. And now it's become, insurance companies and everybody makes sure the more patients you see, the better the higher reward you get, the more you get paid. Well, we all know what suffers in that. Quality can suffer. And if you only focus on how many patients you see, and another one is how many procedures you do, that's been another really difficult, bad outcome of focusing on the wrong things. How much, how many tests did you do? How many prescriptions did you give out? And how many patients do you see per hour? And you can see the unintended consequences of that is terrible. So if we're not looking at outcomes, if we don't care about whether your patients are actually getting healthier or not, then you kind of miss the whole boat. So that's my little preamble before we really launch into this. But it's really important and it matters a lot. And that's why, as my buddy Mark Friedman says, trying hard is not good enough. We really have to look at what it is we're doing and think about that and focus on outcomes. So I'm going to share the screen now. And here we go. And okay, let me get into our slideshow. Okay. All right. So any questions or comments, and have any of you seen programs that you think, have focused overly much on just the numbers? Does anyone have an example to share? If you do, just speak up.
I mean, plenty of the COVID relief just cared about giving money to places without much regard for what they were doing with it or making sure that there was actual need.
Right. And then, you can just celebrate, wow, we gave X amount of money to 44 agencies and it looks great. But if only 18 of those agencies were really prepared to use the money well, then yeah, that's a really, really good example. Anyone else? That's a great one. Okay, so let's talk about these three kinds of measures. Everyone see it? I am, okay, good. So we just talked about process measures. It's not that that doesn't matter. Let's say, for example, well, in your Bennington program, how many did you say you would serve a year?
We said 12.
Okay, 12. So let's say you get the money, you get all this money and you start this program and 6 months in, you've served 2 people. Well, that's not okay. I mean, that does matter, clearly. If you are serving 80% of what you promised, that's probably fine. If you're serving 10 or 20%, then you deserve to have your money yanked. I mean, there's a big, big problem. So process measures do matter, especially when we're talking about, really like very simple things to see that if you're way off. Or another example is, let's say Deb's program, that is going to do fixing up, fixing up the old church. And you say, it's going to take 3 months to get that all painted and the roof repaired. And at 2 months and 28 days, 10% of the painting has been done. That's a very big problem. So it is important to track process measures. And they especially tell you if something's really going off base pretty quickly, you can look at those. And so it matters. And it's important to estimate approximately how many clients you can serve, how many things you can do, how many activities. That matters. But as we talked about, that's not enough. So now let's look at quality measures. How well did we do it? And that really matters because when we, especially, when we think about programs like that Bennington program, you could just hire anybody off the street for minimum wage and throw them in this job and say, free housing, free food, let's go for it. And so if you didn't have quality measures, then, you would be setting yourself up for failure. So it's really important both as you develop your project and as you write about it to a funder, that you look at those measures like staff training and certification, quality is, I actually had timeliness could go in either one, but in some cases, timeliness, especially if you have a multi-process program, its timeliness can really be a quality measure. If you're, you have to get this done before that one, like if you're building a building, timeliness, and being able to adhere to the schedule is really a quality measure, having a great schedule. Service environment. So let's say a doctor's office, is it smelly, and is it, falling apart, and are you treated rudely when you enter? And is the staff nicer to white people than other people? These are all quality measures, and they really matter. And it's interesting because customer satisfaction, I have gone back and forth about this. And many, many people consider customer satisfaction an outcome measure. But I have come to fall on the side of that it really is a quality measure. It matters. It's very important. We want our customers to be satisfied, but they can be satisfied and still not have the outcomes we want. And I can go right back to that Boys and Girls Club example. I mean, those kids would have been absolutely thrilled. Every day they would have come home and they would have been so happy that, about what fun they had and what a great time they had at the Boys and Girls Club. But they, so they would have been very happy, but the outcomes wouldn't have been good. So I think customer satisfaction, there are maybe occasions when customer satisfaction is an outcome measure, but generally it's a quality measure. It shows that we are attending to the kind of things that are going to make people feel comfortable, feel welcome, feel like they belong there, feel like they want to come back. And I mean, that's things as simple as if you're running a class, is the room too hot or cold? Are the chairs uncomfortable? Is there access to water? Is there a bath? Just all these little things. These are all quality measures. And staff training and certification are almost always when you're hiring people to do something, or even sometimes when you're bringing volunteers in, as we discussed in that project with the park. That would absolutely be a quality measure. One of the first things that you folks brought up was making sure if we're going to be using volunteers that we give them the kind of training they need. So if you just got a bunch of volunteers and said, oh, we used 40 volunteers, but they were picking up the wrong plants or planting the wrong thing or just throwing, the weeds into the water, then that's a really good quality measure, which, as you can see, it contributes to your outcome measures. Your quality measures often do contribute to your outcome measures. But when we get to outcomes, we really want to look at, and this is directly from Mark Friedman and results-based accountability, is anyone better off? Because at the end of the day, that is why we're doing our programs. And it addresses the results of program activities, changes in attitude. This is it. If these are what you want to look for, changes in attitude, knowledge, skills, behavior, or condition. If it's not one of these, then it's not an outcome measure. Then it's either a quality measure, or it's either how well did we do it or how much did we do. Mark Friedman gives a nice example here of how we can apply this to programs where we don't really have a clear client. And he talks about a river cleanup program where the outcome is that the water is cleaner and healthier and more oxygenated. And he said, in that case, the client is the fish, unless it's, a recreational program. So and the condition, we didn't change the attitude, knowledge, skills, or behavior of the fish, but we did change their condition. So even if it's, not people, it's often people, but if it's not people, then there's something that is changing. There's something that we're having, look better, or I mean, be better. It's improved. So let's look at some examples of these, because I think examples are really helpful. And this is harder than it looks. And that's why I decided, even though I have so much to share with you, I decided that we're going to do this kind of fun little exercise, because it's really interesting to kind of tease out like what really is an outcome versus a quality measure versus a process measure. So I think you'll enjoy practicing some of this a little later on. So let's first talk about this a little more. Process measures. How much did we do? And I picked two very different kinds of programs here. And this really speaks to that example I talked about. If all you looked at are the number of patients treated per month, the number of procedures done per physician, and the average time per patient visit, that could absolutely mean that the worst provider could be the most rewarded. And you could be doing a terrible job as far as health outcomes, and yet your statistics look fantastic. And I have to say that sadly, I think we all know this, that these are the kinds of measures that are often used in healthcare. We all know that, and that has been a real detriment in so many cases. So it's so important that we don't just look at that. Now, again, it does matter. You know, if you're in an emergency department and there's one physician, you know, and the average amount of patients that a physician sees there is 5 per hour, and there's one physician who consistently sees 1 patient per hour, that's a big problem, obviously. But if there's also a physician who's seeing 12 patients per hour, you know, that could be a problem too, unless you're only rewarding, you know, the higher number. So, you know, it's only part of the story. It's so important to know that. So these matter, but it's not just that. So hazardous waste removal program, the level of effort, the time and the personnel you're using, and the tons of waste removed. That matters a lot, the tons of waste removed. And you would think that, well, that might be it. Maybe that's fine. As long as they're removing it, maybe we don't need more, but let's move on to quality. And I picked this one. I made this one up, and I made a hard one for myself on purpose. I wanted to challenge myself, because on the face of it, it seems, you know, it would seem like, well, hazardous waste removal program, you're supposed to remove waste. So, you know, that should be it. But let's move on and see why quality and outcome measures also matter. Okay, let's go to the health clinic first. Patient satisfaction data. This is so important, and it's a wonderful quality measure. And fortunately, a lot of our clinics and hospitals are now using this. They, you know, how many of us have gotten, you know, surveys after we were there? Certainly I have. So, you know, we know that they care about this now. Efforts to reach a diverse target population. These are just examples. There's many, but you can do, you could even have great outcome measures. Let's say you have great outcome measures for 80% of your people. In let's say, we won't take a healthcare program. Let's say it's a parenting program for parents. It's a parenting program, and 80% of the parents show, you know, at the end of the program that not only are they happy with the program, but they, you know, they also, they're doing better on parenting. They're yelling less. They're, you know, kids are going to bed on time. The kids are reporting that, you know, things are doing better, whatever the outcome measures are. Well, it's this kind of quality measure means that you'd better dig a little deeper, dive in and look at, well, that's great that 80% are really happy with it, but who are those 20%? And if you find that all those 20%, if they're the folks who either speak English as a second language, or they are the folks who are that it's mainly a very middle class population, and these are the folks who are coming from a more have fewer resources and are living in poverty, and those are the ones who you haven't served well. Or if it's a particular race or background, if it turns out that wow, the white people love us but nobody else does, well then this is why these quality measures, as you're devising your program, you decide what is it that we want to measure, what's important. There are all kinds of quality measures you could do, and these are just 3 of them. Extent to which staff meet or exceed recommended training certifications is another. In a health clinic, that probably is really important as a quality measure. You absolutely want to make sure that your staff are well trained and have the certifications. Can somebody think of another quality measure we could use in a health clinic, other than these 3, which are nice ones? What else might tell you that the clinic is a high quality clinic?
Would it have
It is-
anything to do with measuring the kind of practices? I'm just being innovative, or
That might be one. So for example, quality, you might decide that we want to be a more holistic program. So we're going to offer 4 services here, 4 or 5 services. And yeah, that could definitely be a quality measure. Someone else?
Staff retention?
Staff retention is an excellent, excellent quality measure. That's a really great one. So is patient retention.
That's what I was
Right?
gonna say, yeah.
Are the patients coming back? Although, patient satisfaction gets at some of this. I'll tell you, there's other ones that are for particular situations. Again, it really depends upon where you are and what matters to you. And this isn't a very unusual one, but quality measures, if you are in a place, if you're a clinic, let's say you're a health clinic that is serving a population that is very low income, and most of them don't have their own cars, access to transportation, that might very well be a quality measure. That's an unusual one. But again, you have to think about what matters to you. And so access to public transportation. And another one, I'll tell you, let's say that you're serving largely a working population. Another quality measure would be flexible hours, right? So if you're only open 9 to 5, then you may not, that's something to really consider. As a quality program is one that really thinks about what does the population need, what are we missing, how can we really provide what they consider, what they need and what's quality. Now, I want to tell you, you could do all those things and still not have good outcomes. You could have staff who meet or exceed recommended training certifications. You could have flexible hours. You could have a program that makes sure that you're really reaching a diverse population. And you can even have the patients liking what you do. And you could still have poor outcomes, because let's think about this. This is a good one, because I want to, quality measures are not enough. It could be that the services you're offering are not what people really need. It might be, they might be happy with it, because I'm just making this up, but let's say that this is a population that has really experienced a tremendous increase in opioid addiction and problems. Or let's just say, substance abuse overall. Well, let's say that the healthcare personnel aren't addressing those problems at all. They are trained in certain, to do their certain jobs, and they're reaching a diverse population, and people are happy with them because, they're saying, oh yeah, my doc, everything's great. They're not probing. They're not, they're happy that nobody's kind of, making them uncomfortable and asking those probing questions. So you could have a health clinic where you're doing all kinds of things to satisfy the patients, but you're still not getting the outcomes because you're not really focused in on what are the outcomes that we want. The changes in attitude, knowledge, behavior, condition, and I'm missing one. Anyway, attitude, knowledge, behavior. Anyway, there's one more there. Okay, let's look at a very different kind of program, this hazardous waste program. Okay, not only do we want to remove a bunch of waste, but what if we didn't have any practices regarding safety measures for personnel? What if we said the most important thing is that you get that stuff out of there? And, we want to get the most money for, we want to get the most effort for our buck. So we're not going to train you on how to do this safely. We're not going to give you the right equipment. We're not going to test whether it's, poisonous. We're not going to make sure that you have been through a safety training program. So you can see that it's, these quality measures really matter. And then another quality measure is efficiency. So if you're just looking at the number of the level of effort, how much time in personnel and the tons of waste removed, if you're looking also at quality, then you are absolutely going to be saying, okay, we have this many staff and we have this much money. How can we, and we're training them how to do it correctly. We're going to ask our staff, how can we do it better? Have you discovered that there's a way, maybe we should have 3 people on this job and only 1 on this one? Or, maybe after we've taken out most of the waste and there's only 10% left, are we spending far too much time on that 10%? And is there a way we could improve it? So you can see how the quality measures really matter here too. And then we really want to go to, I didn't say skills, which is very important. We want to look at the outcomes. Is anyone better off? Changes in attitude, knowledge, skills, behavior, or condition. So let's look at this. The percent of, and some of these, I want to say that in many cases, your grant, as we've talked about in the past, it's for only a year. So let's say that you have primarily a population. I said here, cardiac care. You have a population who is at high risk or has already had a serious cardiac issue. They've had a heart attack, they've had a stroke, or they're, very high cholesterol, they have diabetes, their blood pressure is very high. In 1 year, you are not going to turn these people into marathon runners who are at their ideal weight and have perfect nutrition and are, getting out and walking 6 miles a day. That's not going to happen. So we have to look at each of these and the attitude, knowledge, skills, behavior, and condition, and decide what can we reasonably expect to change in a year, if it's a year-long grant, number 1. And number 2, what can we change that actually helps that points us to better health? That even if we can't make we can't get everybody to lose 30 pounds in a year, what is it that we can do that's going to really, show that we've made a difference in their outcome? And in this case, it's their health related to cardiac care. So a simple one is a percent of patients who understand the nutritional guidelines. We can't make them all eat really well, but we can change their knowledge. We can improve their knowledge. So now, some of them may not have ever understood that, fast food is actually really bad for you, or why those guidelines matter, or, what it means to, what whole grains mean, just for example. The percent of patients who increase their physical activity as prescribed. This is a great one because that means that you're not going to say the percent who, run 6 miles every day, because you understand that they're all at different places. So this is on you to develop outcome measures that are realistic and reasonable and that absolutely show a change, but that don't hold you to something that you can't do. So this is a beautiful one, because what it means is that we are going to hold ourselves accountable to have really have a good percent of patients who increase their physical activity as prescribed. And if need be, you can set that percent, but ideally you want to just show that, you're right now at the starting point, at the base, there might have been, 20% who are doing the physical activity that their doctor thinks, is realistic and reasonable for them and will help them get in better health. And so you want to show a really good upward curve, ideally. And if the grant doesn't require it, but they often do, I guess what I don't like is when they require it, it's a guesstimate, because you really don't know with a program like this whether it's going to be, whether 70% or 80% is a reasonable number. Certainly you want most of them to increase it, but you also take into consideration where your patients are now. If you are working, if this cardiac care clinic is for unhoused people who've been out on the street and are still out on the street, and they're only coming in because, somebody identified them, and you've somehow, given them the incentives because they are, they're in such bad shape, and they've been in and out of the ER, and someone's identified that we have to have this clinic, and you actually, bring the clinic to them, you are going to have a lot fewer who increase their physical activity as prescribed than if you're dealing with some kind of, hospital-based clinic for people who are an insured population, who who are educated already and understand that, this makes sense, and they're able to do it. So you also, it's not going to be the same for everybody, but again, it's on you to set something that is a realistic goal. And as I always said, as I've said many times, you want it to be realistically optimistic and optimistically realistic. So if you set it, if you think that it's going to be somewhere around 70 to 75%, I would set it at 80, because you're going to look really good. And then no one's going to take away the money if only 70% of them increase their physical activities as prescribed. However, if you're working with that very difficult unhoused population, and you're going to lose a bunch of them and they're not able to follow it, it may be that 30% is actually what you're going to strive for. And so if you set it at 80, and then you better explain why 30% is so important, why that makes sense. So if you set it at 75 or 80%, then you're going to fail. And that's going to look really bad to the funder, and it's going to be a really uphill, difficult experience for you. And then the percent of patients with blood pressure in normal range. This is something that is easily measurable. And in healthcare, you're often able to do something that is readily measurable. If you're able to, if there is something that is easily measurable, I like to include that as one of the outcome measures, because it's objective and it's easy. The blood pressure in normal range is fantastic. That's a really good one to do. And you're going to base it on the science. And I have no idea what the science is, but let's say that 100% of your patients at the beginning have high blood pressure. It may be that, getting 25% of them within normal range is a reasonable thing. Or maybe you even want to say that, the percent of patients with blood pressure in the normal or whatever the next level is above normal range, because they're all at very high risk for, they're at a very high level right now. So again, these really depend on you knowing your population and understanding. And this again is why you can see throwing these together doesn't work. It definitely takes time to make sure that you're setting up the right outcomes, that both these are what we want to be held to. This is how we are going to show that we're really making a difference. And also that they are robust enough and impressive enough that you're going to get the money, because it doesn't matter how great your outcomes are if you don't get the money, right? So then let's look at the hazardous waste removal program. Improve soil quality. reduced groundwater pollution, and reduced human exposure. You can see how much these matter and how impressive they're going to be and how, they really are what you want, compared to if you just stick with tons of waste removed and how much time you spent. It's possible that you could remove many tons of waste, but if you don't follow the right procedures, you may be dripping it all along and you may have waste, coming out of the trucks. You may end up with a worse situation than you started with. So you want things, again, improved soil quality is something that can be measured, and reduced groundwater pollution is something that, you can really show. And then reduced human exposure is an outcome that, that's a pretty easy one, because clearly if we removed all this waste, we have reduced human exposure. What I forgot to say just one thing about this cardiac care clinic. I almost always want to have outcomes in more than one area, not just all. Attitude is the easiest one to change. And so I don't think I've ever done a program unless that's the whole program. Let's say that it's a program dealing with adolescents who've engaged in racist, taunting, terrible behavior. And the whole program is to change their attitude. Well, even then, you would want to change their knowledge and their behavior. So I don't think attitude is sufficient. It's important, it's good. But usually I want to go for knowledge, skills, behavior, condition. And I want to have, if I have three, usually I have 3 to 4 outcomes. And I usually want to have, they're never all knowledge or all skills or all behavior, unless that's the whole program. Unless it's just, how much did you know about Homer? If that's your whole program, it's a whole, literature program on learning about Homer. I guess it would be all knowledge, but usually there's a reason that you're doing that program on Homer, and it's usually bigger than just learning about Homer or, Shakespeare or whatever, whoever it is. So I usually want to pick and choose and make sure that we're really addressing all of these. These are different kinds of outcomes, but most programs can address more than one. So with that, I think we are ready now to, we're ready to go to our exercise. And you folks got the exercise, and I didn't want you to do it beforehand, but if you did, oh well. But what I'd like you to do with this exercise. Oh, first, any questions or comments? What we're going to do, yes.
And I was kind of wondering throughout all of this, I was sort of feeling the weight of, for example, with the health clinic outcomes, these specific objectives that are measurable. You're going to have to do a heck of a good job designing an instrument to measure the pre and post, I think. And then that kind of goes back to the earlier part of the grant, doesn't it? Because you're giving you're giving a pre-evaluation. And then
Yes. Yes. No, that's a good point. And I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I want to spend a little time on. For a $30,000 grant, you sure don't want to spend $20,000 on some fancy schmancy evaluation. So it's really important to look at how can we do this in a way that does show a difference, but that, we're not a sophisticated university program. We have to do this very simply. So very commonly, I suggest a survey, a baseline survey. So, and that would only be for something where you're comparing before and after. So the only one here where you would need that baseline survey is increase their physical activity as prescribed. So let's talk about how you'd measure the other outcomes. The percent of patients who understand the nutritional guidelines. You would, I'm just making this up, but let's say that part of this whole program is that you have a workshop. It could be online or it could be in person, about nutritional guidelines. And then as part of this, it's pretty simple to do a little test, that tells, true or false, or, having them multiple choice or whatever. It's pretty easy to tell whether they understand the nutritional guidelines. So you're doing a little test. For this second one, you're doing a simple survey. And it really, when I say simple, I mean, it could be like 5 or 6 questions that takes a very short amount of time that, they just do as part of intake into the program. And then the percent of patients with blood pressure in the normal range, a health clinic, that's not comparative, but it is in a way, because we wouldn't be setting this up unless we were already telling people in the grant that we're dealing with folks who are, they have these health conditions. We're really worried about them. And one problem is that many of them have blood pressures that are really skyrocketing high. So, but I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to do. But that's a really good point. As you're designing your outcome measures, you want to make sure that you're not doing things that are impossible, that are going to take a great amount of time and effort and money. So yeah, that's always a consideration. So for example, in this cardiac care program, let's say instead of saying the percent of patients who understand the nutritional guidelines, what if I said the percent of patients who are following the nutritional guidelines? Oh my God, how would I ever measure, can you imagine how hard that would be? That would be much harder to judge. We would have to, have them like mark off on a book every day. We'd have to have someone go look at them. So you really think about what is reasonable. Now, if you were doing a $300,000 program and it was very intense and you were giving people food and, spending a lot of time teaching them how to shop, how to cook, well, then you might actually, if it's $300,000, then by God, you might want to make sure that they're actually following those guidelines. But for $30,000, and I made this up, you are not going to do that. So you really need to give yourself, give yourself a break and say, okay, what can we reasonably measure? I also want to say that in some cases, there are measures already out there. So for example, in that after school project that I was talking about, what we had for one of the program outcome measures was that we were going to increase developmental assets in the areas, and we only picked 2. There's 30 areas. We picked 2, social competencies and positive identity. Well, how did we do that? Well, we had something called a youth development outcome measurement toolkit. So if there is something that you can get off the shelf that is national or statewide and is respected, and it's, there's a survey that you don't have to make up, that makes you look really good. That's great. So you're doing this youth development outcome measurement toolkit. And as I said, we only picked 2 measures. So we only have to ask the kids, we do a baseline, but instead of having them take some kind of 100 question survey, we have them take probably an 8 or 10 question survey at baseline. And then we go back and look at it. So again, we were looking at what can we reasonably do that actually matters, that shows that we're making a difference and shows us and also shows the funder. So if there is some kind of test that you can use that's already available, good for you. That's a great way to go. So good question. Any other questions at this point before we go into our small groups? And I'll explain what we're going to do. So for breakout rooms, what we're going to do is this is a fun little little test, I guess it is, or just just a great opportunity to look at what we are, what we consider outcomes, what are outcomes and what aren't. And so there's A, B, C, D, E. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. different kinds of programs here. And what I'd like you to do in your group is to discuss them and choose which are outcomes for each one of these. And each one of them, there can be more than one per, so there's 5 choices under each one of these programs. And it may be that there may be 2 or 3 that are actually outcomes. There's, yeah, I think just about all of them, there's more than one. So I want you to talk about that as a group and come up with your answers, and then we'll come back and share them. I think I am going to give you also time here. So this should only take about 10 to 15 minutes. And what I'd like you to do with the rest of the time, it's too, this whole outcome measurement, it's a real learning process, and it takes, 30 minutes wouldn't be enough to have you really like come up with good outcomes. But I would like you to talk about in your groups what kinds of things that you might want to measure for outcomes. We're not going to get there yet today, especially because I think it's important to do this exercise. I really like it. But in your last 15 minutes when you're together, I'd like you to, I gave, let me see. I put these up. I don't know if you have them with you, but here's group 1. I guess we'll just review them quickly. So I'd like you to think about what might be outcomes. And I'm not talking about the process measures or the quality measures right now. I'd like you to think about what are the outcome measures you'd like to see. Here's group 2.
I guess I thought we were going to look at your A through E.
We're going to do that first. That's going to take 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'm going to give you 15 more minutes. I'll give you 30 minutes in your group, and I want you to talk about
Try and do that. Okay.
And then we'll come back and we'll
Thanks.
talk about that. Group 3, the South Londonderry project. And group 4, Townsend. Oh, oops. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, everybody. I just saw that I had a typo. Well, I'll correct that later. Which is used for. Okay, so those are our 4 projects. So what I'd like you to do is, it's okay if it takes you longer on this outcomes exercise, that's okay. Just use whatever time's left to start talking about for your project, what would you see as outcomes? And again, that's changes in attitudes, knowledge, skills, behavior, or condition, which is what you want to see with these projects. And some of them are a reach. It's not easy, it's a little hard. So I think it'll be interesting to see what your discussion produces. So you are going to agree, all of you, on this A through E together as a group, and then we'll share them when we come back. Okay, so I'm going to put you into your breakout rooms. I think everybody knows now whether you're in group 1, 2, 3, or 4. And if there's a breakout room that only has a couple of you, then I'll assign you to a different room. Okay, any questions before we break out? All right, let's go. Start, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so moving on to youth citizenship program. 4-H groups in 45 countries participated in community service projects. Yes or no?
No.
I can't believe you got that. You're right. Because it looks so good, right? On the surface. On that one, I always think of my son, who he was so bad about all this community service stuff. They required community service at high school. And he came back and he said he'd done it. And it turns out that they went to some kind of senior center thing, and he just hung out outside, you know, So yeah, just because you participated doesn't mean that you've learned anything about youth citizenship. Teens volunteered in community service an average of 10 hours over the year. Outcome? No. Again, these are really great measures to have. They're important. They're process measures and they matter, but you're right. Teens reported increased ability to identify and help solve a community need.
We said yes.
Absolutely. That's a great outcome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Teens feel more engaged in and responsible for their community. Yes, it's
Said
amazing
yes.
how just by all we know is that it's a youth citizenship program. And we look at these outcomes and it's very clear that these outcomes are directly related to what we want to see. They're a change in skill, behavior, attitude, or knowledge. A local industry contributed $1,500 to the 4-H community service project. No, that's a great thing to say. It's good to use in publicity, but it really doesn't mean that. You're right. It's not about the kids. We don't know what happened to that money. We have no idea what happened to that money. They may have spent it on all those video games and ice cream sundaes. Okay, last one, quality assurance. Producers decreased their use of medications and made biosecurity improvements to prevent health problems. Yes, that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to see as an outcome. That's great. 724 adults and 1,026 youth participated in training sessions.
No.
Yeah, no, you're getting very good at this. It's obvious. We don't know how good they are, or what happened in those. Producers changed management practices because of what they learned.
Yes.
Yes. Veterinarians co-taught the sessions. That was an easy one. We all know that that's not an outcome measure. Overall herd health increased, reducing production costs.
Yes.
Yeah. I have to say that I had to spend a little time on this last one. Did that come naturally and easy for all of you?
Yeah, because a measure of the health increase was well, I don't know, maybe it's the other way around. The measure of the health increase was the reduced production costs.
I guess why I found this one troubling and hard for me was overall herd health. Yes, but the focus of this wasn't on necessarily reducing production costs, so I got a little confused. And it's a little removed from quality assurance, but I decided that actually it should, the condition changed of the herd health. And even though what we're really focusing on is the producers, what they want to see in the end is, that shows that they're actually practicing those measures. But that one, I actually found that was the hardest one for me of all of these.
Oh, wow.
So interesting. So anyway, I do think this is a really interesting and good exercise. And it's even one to, kind of go back to if you sort of forget, what do we mean by outcome measure? And oh my gosh, now we're close to the time. Wow, time does fly. So before I just have you all talk for a few minutes, well, not all, a few of you, about the outcome measures that you're thinking about for your own programs. I just don't want to forget to say that we are not meeting next week, let's see. This is the 9th. Yeah, we're not meeting this. Oh no, we are meeting the 15th. Yeah, that's the 7th. That's the 7th class. We're meeting on the 15th. And then we're not meeting for 2 weeks. 1 week we're not meeting because I'm going on vacation. Yay. And then the next week we had planned, and then we realized that's town meeting week. And so we definitely don't want to.
Can I ask where you're going on vacation?
Oh, you're going to be sorry you asked. You're going to be so jealous.
I'll be happy for you.
My husband and I are going bicycling in Chile. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
For 10 days. It's
Oh, wow.
really
Sounds
a
amazing.
remarkable thing that we're doing.
Oh,
this.
I'm
So
so
I actually
excited
spent
to hear about that.
a great deal of time caring for my elderly ailing mother over the past 2 years, and I was away a lot of time. I made 10 trips during COVID. And I just promised my husband that when we could, we would take a trip, because he was very, very understanding with us. And And my mother did die in October, which was, I mean, she was 94. But anyway, so now we're taking that big trip that we've been putting off. And it looks like we're going to actually be able to do it. COVID is, hopefully receding. So yeah, very exciting. So we just have a few minutes left, but I know that we had, I had an interesting discussion in a couple of rooms about the outcome measures that you might do. And this is hard stuff. It takes really, looking at what kind of change do we want to see? And you're not going to get it right the first time. And I never do. The first time when I'm working on outcome measures, it's so much easier to do process measures and quality measures that you have to really push yourself to say, what is it that we really want to see? Who's the client? Who are we focused on? And what's the difference we want to see? Does someone want to share a little about that for like 3 minutes? Deb doesn't want to share. It's hard, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I think you should give the other groups, a shot. at
Yeah, no, you were, so somebody else? Did you come up with some outcome measures, or did you find it hard, or did you find yourself going with quality?
I
We
just say-
did,
Yeah,
Okay. In terms of Deb's project, it's the repair to the chapel, the historic chapel. So we were inclined to really focus in on how much of the project are we going to complete by a certain timeline, which was pointed out that that's not really what we were looking for. So we then began to try to focus in on what is the measurement of community engagement when it's such apparent, it appears to be such a physical project. And so I liked what we came up with, which is the way to measure people's relationship to this physical project and is to measure community engagement. And the way we would do that is by a volunteer recruitment and volunteer activity.
yeah. And you'll have another outcome too. You always have more than one outcome, but
Yeah.
you can see how it's so easy to start out, oh, we're going to look at, how quickly the project gets done. Well, that is a process measure. What are you really caring about? What you really care about is bringing the community together. So
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing. And volunteer engagement is a really nice way to measure that. Somebody else, I saw yes, go ahead.
so we
Nice.
took a quick stab at the trail improvements in South Londonderry, and I have no idea, I just scribbled this, but provide a mode of logging in and leaving customer comments to share information and observations about the trail.
So that is a really good idea, but that is a measurement method. That's not an
Okay.
outcome. Do you
All right.
understand why? That's how you're
Yes.
going to get to some information about your outcome. Why are you doing that? Why do you care? Why do you want people to comment? Because what are you looking for?
We're looking for people to be educated and entertained.
Right. So
Wow.
the outcome, you're measuring it through this, but the outcome is that people, one outcome is that people come away from this trail experience with more historical knowledge and appreciation and understanding of maybe, the history, the culture. I mean, that might be one outcome. There are other outcomes
yeah.
too. But do you understand what you wrote? And, there was another group that was working on this too, is how are we going to measure the outcomes? But that's not the outcomes. The outcome, if it's not a change in attitude, skills, behavior, knowledge, or condition, it's not an outcome. And again, I want to just leave you because we have to go now. That doesn't mean that you don't list these process measures. How much did we do? And quality measures, how well did we do it? Those do matter and they're important and they're much easier to measure. So you definitely want to include some of those. But if you only include those and don't look at, is anyone better off, then you're really not showing us how you're making the difference that you intended when you started this project. And that's what we funders are looking for. When I say we, all of us, you know, who are on those review committees. And that's why we're doing this, because we're not doing it just to paint a building. We're doing it because there's a reason behind that has to do with people. And same with improving the trail. Improving the trail or the parking area, that's really important. You know, how much did we do and how well did we do it? But we're doing it for a reason. We also want to measure, are we, you know, are people really getting, you know, finding this a useful and positive and great and, you know, a great experience. And that's what you were measuring through that. That's a
Yes.
nice way to measure it.
So that would improve conditions to do the
Well,
redo the
that
parking
shows
lot.
that people have their
Used
attitude,
it,
you know,
yeah.
you've changed their attitude really. And another thing that you might want to look at is, you know, I think when you say, is anyone better off, an outcome measure could be, in this case, you can use some things where you're measuring. If there's a lot more use, if there's a lot more people cycling, if there's a lot more people using this trail and enjoying it, that's a pretty good outcome measure, because that means their behavior has changed. That's a behavior change. So I think that's great. All right.
We'll work on that.
Yeah, no, these are hard things. It's tough, but it's worth it. And it's good because it's going to make your project stronger. All right. Bye, everybody. I will see you next week. It's the day after that I head off. All right.
Bye,
Goodbye.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Bye.